New at 6, we continue our series about the prevalence of human trafficking in our area and the efforts to combat it.
The FBI tells us about 90% of human trafficking cases are sex trafficking and the other 10% labor trafficking. The average age of sex trafficking victims, 12 years old.
Victim advocates define sex trafficking as using someone for a sexual act in exchange for anything of value. That can be food, shelter, transportation, drugs, or money. It's a hard topic, and no one wants to discuss it, but today we're doing just that.
Yeah, 5 News This Morning anchor Tiffany Lee brings us the story of a sex trafficking victim. Do want to warn you, some of the details may not be easy to listen to.
I think they're...
Most people, when they hear trafficking, think of what they see in movies.
I will look for you. I will find you.
But for many survivors, it's more than what you see on the big screen.
Hi, my name is Lynn Piper-Loomis. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share my story. But really, this is not about me. This is about a larger problem and the need to utilize solutions that have never been utilized or used before to eradicate child trafficking, organ, sex, drug, and human trafficking. And I share this with you not as a victim or as a survivor, but as an overcomer. I don't identify as anything else other than a child of God. And I'm going to go very quickly through my story because to explain a life of trauma and all of that would take forever. But I do want to tell you that there was 7 steps that were a repeated pattern throughout my life when I went through trauma that took me from an awareness as a victim to an awareness as an overcomer. And so those were the tools that I used in addition to my faith in Jesus Christ and God helping me walk out of these places for healing, forgiveness, and ultimately led to my journey of being free. Going back multiple generations in my family, people have been groomed from birth, programmed, occultic practices have been involved. My mother was groomed from birth. She was raped by her father repeatedly. She was made to have sex with her brothers. They raped her, and while he watched, and he raped them as well. As a toddler, I remember him taking my diaper off, inserting himself and raping me and putting objects in me. And my mother was not aware because she wasn't in the same room. And as I got a little bit older, I shared this with her. And her oldest brother, about the same time, drank himself to death. He died from cirrhosis of the liver. And so right after that, she came forward and told everyone what she had been through, knowing full well that most of them knew. She was alienated in the family. She had some relationship with her sister, some relationship with her mom, but it was not a healthy one. And so that was 2 to 4 years before she and I were involved in a car accident. We both died on impact. God gave me a choice to come back or go back to heaven with my mom. And so I said goodbye to my mom in the spirit. And when God blew his breath back into my lungs, giving me life, they were cutting a hole into the side of my chest cavity for a tube to go in for a collapsed lung. I suffered significant trauma and injuries. I was in ICU. But basically within a year after her death, and I'm skipping over a large part of my story because I want to get to the trafficking end. We know that trafficking is the exchange of something or someone for a profit. And so there had been conversations that were taking place with my aunt and uncle in another state by my stepdad. And so I knew I was going to be transferred, trafficked, if you will. I was going to be a slave in the home. I heard conversations. There was discussions of money exchange. And you know that when CPS gets involved, there's home studies, there's inspections, those types of things. So I was trafficked through the Child Protective Services system with these adults making these arrangements across state lines at 13 years of age. And when I got there, I was immediately stripped of my belongings, of what I had. And the only things I was able to hold on to, I hid some of my mom's personal belongings and I held on to her Bible. I was raised up with a strong faith in the Lord, she was a great woman of faith, and that's what has carried me through all these years. So I didn't have a CPS worker, I didn't have a CASA worker, I didn't have an advocate ad litem, none of that before or after the transfer. And they had a child that was 4 years younger than me, a child that was 13 years younger than me, and later would have a child that was about 15 years younger than me. And I think they went on to have children after I escaped. These people were evil. They beat and tortured me. They beat the tar out of their child that was 4 years younger than me. So we attended church, a very rigid, strict Baptist church. I was able to go to school, but I was put into my aunt's bloodstained underwear. I was put into her maternity clothes, and I knew that this was going to be hell on earth. From the age of 13 to 16 and a half, I was raped, restrained, and unrestrained. I lost 2 children due to miscarriages from trauma, incest. And I also remember having my legs and my arms wrapped around the feet of the dining room table and watching them as they beat the crap out of their daughter. Whether or not they sexually assaulted her and raped her, I don't know. But my room was in the basement, and I at times would be locked in a box. There was occultic practices that took place, and I endured this for 3.5 years. I tried telling some of my church leaders, but both my aunt and uncle were well respected in the community, and so a lot of those things were dismissed. I remember sharing things with other people, and not massive details because I was threatened and I was afraid for my life. But the last assault that took place was at 16 and a half. It was the last time that my uncle came down to my room to assault me. And I jumped out of bed, shaking in the fear of the Lord, and I had courage to tell him he had to stop and that he had to say what was going on, because if he didn't, I was going to tell. And so within about 24 to 48 hours, he and my aunt both came down to my room, and they told me that if I ever said anything, they would deny it. And they threatened to kill me and that my body would never be found. And so I knew I didn't have much time, and I knew I could not stay living with any life in me, because every single time that I was raped, every single time I was tortured, every single time there was cult practices taking place, I was locked in the box. I do not explain, but internally I would just disconnect from everything, and I just grew numb. And I knew that there wasn't going to be much life left in me. So within that 24 to 48 hours, that was on a weekend, I believe, I packed up my mom's Bible and a few belongings, and I headed out the door. And I went to my school counselor's office that morning at school. I left a note on her door because she wasn't available, and I said, I need to talk to you before the end of the day. It's an emergency. So I went through the whole morning waiting for my name to be called on the overhead intercom. And I finally get to my early afternoon period for science class, and I just go outside the hall and I just lose it, because I knew I couldn't go back. And I'd already started looking at the emancipation process, what it would look like to get a job, a car, a place to live, and be able to show that this stuff was taking place and I could get away. But anyways, I had a friend that came out to the hall and just checked on me and was asking me what was going on. And then I heard my name over the intercom. I was so relieved. I went to the school counselor and I sat in front of her and I said, I know that what I'm about to tell you, you're going to have to call the police. There's going to be arrests that are going to be made. And I said, but I can't go back home because I know that you won't be able to find my body. And so I was able to share a little bit of the details. My uncle was arrested that day. And the process that took place was that the police told me that they would be escorting me inside of my aunt's car to a place that they had vetted that was someone that she knew for the next few days. And so she wasn't supposed to mention anything to me in the car, and she did. And she said, we could have worked this out. And I'm just thinking, how could we have worked this out? I said, I told you I was done and you did nothing. And I said, you're my mom's sister. You were supposed to protect me, not hurt me. And so we get to her friend's house who was pregnant, who later would tell me that she couldn't keep me. She was about to start her own family, and I understood that. And so she took me to the store, and I hadn't had new clothes in a long time or undergarments that fit me. She brought me clean, brand new undergarments, things that fit me, bought me new clothes from the Limited and the Express, new shoes, toiletries, things that we take for granted on a daily basis, but were luxury items to me at that time. And within 3 days, you'd think CPS, would do something. No. I found a place to live. I stayed with one of my best friends. Her mom was a single mom, and she had a younger sister. And so I slept on her floor for 2 to 3 weeks, by what I can remember. And in that place, she began to be asked a lot of questions. People in the community were giving them a hard time. Again, I was still trying to figure out this emancipation. Meanwhile, CPS wasn't doing anything to find me a safe place. So what ended up happening was God gave me an exit strategy, and at 16 and a half, I left that state. So I was bullied into allowing my offenders to be one of the offenders to plea bargain. So that's the gist of the story. I have to tell you that I would not be here if it wasn't for God and my relationship with him. I wrote a book called I'm Silent No More. I don't go into the gruesome details. It's a very faith-building story. But in the back of the book, there is 7 steps that I repeatedly walked through. And what led to my freedom, even though I'd have more years of trauma and healing, I had to forgive those who hurt me. Their offense on me was dealt with on the cross. So Jesus says, take my yoke upon you, my burden is light. And so I didn't have to bear the weight of vengeance or getting back at them. I just had to release that. And in doing that and forgiving them, they no longer had power over me. The devil no longer had power over me. So that was, it took me years, but I finally was able to forgive them and walk in freedom. Now, obviously, amnesia walls get lifted and we get triggered and things happen. So there's another layer. Our hearts are like onions. There's layers that get peeled back, we heal, and then there's another layer. So I just wanted to share that with you. I'm so thankful for being able to share this, and I hope and my prayer is that this is a testimony to you of how good God is. Thank you so much.
She looks like she could be under 18. She can't identify herself. He's 35. I say that's good enough to hold for an investigation.
The trooper had stopped this car near Toledo and noticed the passenger was a young girl without any identification riding with an older man. Troopers determined she was being taken to Chicago from New Jersey, where she was reported as missing. Tonight, that man is in jail, charged with abduction.
News Magazine 2020 with Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters. Tonight, the cult Children of God. Founded by Moses David Berg, he reportedly sanctioned sex among children.
I practice what I preach, and I preach sex, boys and girls, hallelujah.
To win converts, women members entice total strangers.
Only the flirting was more than flirting. It was actually, religious prostitution.
My name is Kim Kelly. I'm a survivor and an advocate, and I now work with Veterans for Child Rescue to expose and eradicate child trafficking in the USA. I was born and raised in a religious cult where one of the many forms of abuse was trafficking. I know this evil. I know this enemy, and I have overcome it, and I'm here to pay it forward. I'm here to hopefully be an example that not only is healing a choice, but when you choose to overcome, you can also be that voice, that advocate, that strong person that you may not have had as a child, but that every child deserves. Now, usually when people think of cults, they think of something satanic or something like hippie weirdo. What a lot of people don't realize is how many cults are based on religions like Christianity or other religions that people typically associate with good. Now, there's an aspect to this that's important to understand. Cults have layers, and cults have a public-facing front or top cover, meaning whether or not you would consider them real Christians, the cult I was born and raised in was a Christian cult. That means the abuse, the trafficking, and all the manipulation was done in the name of Jesus. Christians don't like hearing that, and I'm mature enough to understand that it wasn't God or Jesus abusing me. It was humans abusing that power. So it can get dangerous when people assume that they're Christian missionaries, they're good people, the children are totally fine, because they don't look further and realize that there's a lot more to the story than what they're being told or than what they can identify that may be harmful. Now again, it's one thing if adults decide to join this type of lifestyle or community where they choose to live a very different life. It's a very different thing when they have children, either bring children into it or have children in this environment who can't advocate for themselves, who don't know anything else, and who are severely manipulated in this lifestyle. Children are often used as a commodity. Sometimes there's a form of labor trafficking, there's other forms of exploitation, and there are generally various forms of sexual abuse. Now, what gets even more dangerous is when religion, or God, or Jesus, is used as the guise to demand or request or require that type of service. So when we talk about brainwashing and manipulation and psychological and emotional abuse, when we talk about when we talk about physical harm, sexual abuse, and other forms of physical abuse, when it's done under the name of God or Jesus, there's a specific type of manipulation. The way you get people to believe a lie is that you mix your lie with some truth. So there's some power in what they can sense about it. There's something real that they can't deny, but it's also masked with the other types of belief system that the cult wants you to accept. So not only can this be very dangerous, it can be very confusing, not only for people like me who are born and raised in this environment where we're told God wants X, Y, and Z type of abuse. This is God's love. This is how we show Jesus's love to the world. But also because there's an aspect of psychological manipulation where you're made to believe that this thing that's real and that the world generally accepts is also requiring this of you. So you're made to accept the entire package instead of critically thinking for yourself that this may be real, but is this really necessary? Is this really right? Now, for a child, they're not really going to second guess the type of belief system that they're spoon-fed from the time they're born. However, adults who know the outside world and chose to join this form of community or belief system, they know the difference of what they came from. They know what they came from. They chose to join this community and accept this belief system, and regardless of what you call brainwashing, they choose to adopt and maintain that belief system every day. What's most harmful is when they also choose to perpetuate this belief system onto children who cannot advocate for themselves, who know nothing else, and who cannot determine right from wrong in this manipulative, controlling environment. So awareness is important, because what people don't understand is that cults can come in all shapes, sizes, and religions and belief systems. Cults are still a thing today. This is a thing that's still happening in our society. A lot of these are entities the government is very aware of. A lot of them operate tax-free. A lot of them operate right in front of us, but what we think we know about them is very different than what may be actually happening on the interior layers of these communities. I'm not here to say that every cult is evil. However, I personally believe that adults should be free to do what they are free to do under the local and federal laws, but it's not fair, it's not right to subject children to this type of environment that may be harmful, predatory, and very manipulative when the child knows nothing else. That's not religious freedom. You do you if you're an adult, but don't bring children into it. That's the line in the sand.